see a lot of people second time. Luckily, I didn't speak with Ed there, so he can use all my talk for it now. Yeah, it was really nice to see so many people here. So many people so supportive of Israel, and that's a really beautiful thing. And the mayor and everyone, they're just wonderful, wonderful people. So we're going to talk about Ruth today. Anyone familiar with the story of Ruth? Anyone familiar? It's a little bit lesser known story. Anyone know who wrote the book of Ruth? Samuel. Samuel wrote the book of Ruth. We'll see we're not going to address that. There's so many. So Ruth is a lesser known book. Someone's trying to find it. Or they're telling me that they can't find it. Okay, so Ruth is a lesser known book. A lot of Jewish people have the tradition to read it on which holiday? Anyone know? Shavuos. We read it on the holiday of the giving of the Torah. We'll discuss the reasons why. Actually, the Sephardi and Hasidic tradition is not to read it on the holiday in public, but you're meant to read it in private. It's clear that it has symbolism about Judaism. So about the giving of the Torah and Shavuos. And we'll talk about the reasons for that later. Now, there really are a lot of good points we can address from the story of Ruth. So we have to just choose some of them, just because time constraint. Obviously, you can read the book of Ruth. There's even a book called Ruth Rabbah, which is the book of Midrash on Ruth. There is a book, actually, and I actually own the book. I actually bought it. There's this really great author. He works for Art Scroll. It's ultra-Orthodox. And he basically takes stories from the Bible and writes them into novel form, quoting he only follows ancient commentaries. So it's a pretty cool idea. In other words, he takes them and he puts them in so you can read them in the story rather than reading a verse and then reading in the Talmudic, back and forth and what the verse means. He writes it all into a novel. I can share his last name is Deitch. I can share, he has a book about Egypt, about Ruth, about Hanukkah, quoting all the Midrashic and all the Jewish traditions into novel form. So we're going to start off right with the story, and we're just basically going to go through the story of Ruth first. If you have any questions, keep them in the back of your mind, and then we'll go and analyze some verses.
From the year 1228 BCE until 879 BCE, the young Jewish nation, still fresh in their homeland, lurched unsteadily through the era of the judges, like a battered ship, scaling peaks of clarity, then plunging into immorality and suffering. In the midst of this turmoil, a severe famine struck the Holy Land. Elimelech, a wealthy leader from the tribe of Judah, escaped the hunger by relocating from Bethlehem to the hostile pagan country of Moab, along the Holy Land's eastern border, with his wife Naomi and 2 sons. This outstanding Judean family attracted attention. The boys married Moabite princesses, daughters of King Eglon, and granddaughters of the biblical King Balak of Moses' times. Elimelech and his sons met early deaths, and Naomi desired to return to Bethlehem. She urged her childless Moabite daughters-in-law to re-embrace their pagan countrymen. Princess Orpah returned to her idols and depraved lifestyle, and she bore the villainous giant Goliath, who blasphemed the God of Israel and was slain by King David. But Princess Ruth refused to leave Naomi. She cherished her noble mother-in-law and had fallen in love with the God of Israel. Eventually, Ruth became the heroine of all righteous converts. But at the time, she and Naomi found themselves starving in the streets of Judah. God guided Ruth's steps to the feet of her husband, Elimelech. Boaz was struck by Ruth's modesty and righteousness. He guided Ruth in collecting agricultural gifts to the poor prescribed by Torah law, and he offered her protection throughout the harvest season. Young bachelors would have gladly married Ruth, but she sought a man of outstanding saintliness and kindness. Naomi encouraged Ruth to ask the elderly Boaz to marry her. Boaz was moved by Ruth's selfless dedication to her ideals. He first offered Naomi's closer relative a chance to marry Ruth because that man had precedence according to ancient practice. But when the man declined, Boaz and Ruth were married in a joyous public celebration. Ruth's contribution to the Jewish nation altered all of history. She and Boaz had one child, a son whom her former mother-in-law Naomi helped raise to righteousness. That child's grandson, who was born in 907 BCE, was none other than King David.
That pretty much sums up the story of Ruth. Actually does a great job. That's generally speaking the story. We'll see there are details and nuances. What I like about the story of Ruth is there's a lot of undercurrent legal ramifications of different actions happening. And it actually gets really fascinating with King David, but King David we're going to save for next week. He's got a full plate to work with. Next week will be David and Bathsheba, so we'll be studying that story. So first of all, we're going to start, and in order to approach Ruth properly, we're going to ask a simple question. And I think this is a pretty simple question. I mean, most people think it is. Which single value defines modern Western culture more than any others? What would you say is the value, underlying value of Western cultures? Money, that's good. I would dig deeper than money. Well, yeah.
Freedom.
Well, independence.
Independence, freedom. You know, money is kind of freedom also. Capitalism is like freedom of having a lot of money, doing what you want with your money. Your money doesn't belong to the state, it belongs to you. You know, so freedom, I would say freedom is independence and freedom, basically freedom. You know, actually historically, freedom is a pretty relatively new idea. But yeah, what you're going to say, Ed?
Power.
Power.
Shown through money or new cars or whatever.
Well, so I think those, I wouldn't say that's a value. That's maybe an unfortunate thing, but we have the freedom to be powerful, right? We can be powerful. So for this, I guess we'll say that there's freedom, autonomy. That is the value of Western society. America's really good at it. Some people say they're actually really bad. Some people say they're getting worse. Some people say they're getting better. But that's what we're striving for, freedom. We want freedom. Keep your hands out of my pocket, hopefully, and I'll keep my hands out of your pocket. In fact, if you look at history nowadays, freedom is basically what's well, it used to be there were, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right to own arms, whatever it is. Nowadays, the line of freedom is always being pushed. If you want to get into the abortion argument, right, there's people who are pro-choice and against choice. Which one sounds better? Pro-choice sounds much better, right? Against, right? People want to do, they say, I have my body, my choice. I have freedom of my body. I have freedom to get married, not to get married to whoever I want, to get a guy, if I'm a guy, I can marry to a guy, get married to a woman, get married to a rock. We can join a throuple. Right? You guys know what a throuple is, right? That's where you marry two people. You have a threesome, right? So, actually, you know, we see actually that, and then also let's say genders, right? It's like everyone's like, don't define me by my gender, right? I could be man, woman, gender fluid, both all together. There's so many examples of people pushing the autonomy and freedom. I can be whatever I want. Now, don't get me wrong. You know, in Judaism, we're very happy about that because almost all years of 2,000 years of exile, we were in places which were not free to practice our religion, right? So, happens to be the situation works out really, really well for us, and you know, that the fact that we're able to practice our religion. In fact, once there was a conversation, a whole long story, someone came to me and they said, this Jewish person said my religion is idolatry. Do you agree my religion is idolatry? And it happened to be on the radio. So now, not being an expert in which religions are idolatry or not, I don't claim to be an expert, pretty much know Judaism. I told them, I said, And what if it is idolatry? Are you not allowed to do idolatry in America? Right? Are you not allowed to? You can practice whatever religion you want, right? The only thing is you can't hurt somebody else. Actually, if you hurt somebody else, you're kind of taking away their freedom. If you kill somebody, you're taking away their freedom. So everything is freedom-based. You can't hurt somebody else, right? You can't steal from somebody because they want to use, but yeah, in America, we're pretty much like, we're not slaves to anybody. We get to make our own choices. So today what we're going to do is by digging into the story of Ruth, we're going to talk about the Jewish approach to freedom of having a choice. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? You'll see. It's quite complex. And we can see in society, a lot of times people say, I can do whatever I want. And then their kids say, I can do whatever I want. And then their grandkids say, I can do whatever I want. And then the grandparents say, no, you can't. You can't do that. You can only make these choices here. You can't make that choice. That's out of your choice. But essentially, they're both trying to make their own choices, right? So that's what we're going to discuss today. Now, it has a lot to do with Ruth, as we'll see, and it has a lot to do with Judaism. But before that, let's get right into the text. We have the Torah. The Torah, some of us might look at the Torah as a book of good advice, or they might say it's not relevant anymore. They might say, I don't believe in side, because the Torah definitely says it is the Word of God, right? So accepting the premise that the Torah gives down, what is indeed our approach to Torah? Does it take away our choices or not? You'll find there's quite fascinating history. So we'll start with text 1 on page 74. Ivy, would you like to start?
Since the days of the patriarchs, Torah study has not parted from the ancestors. In Egypt, they had Torah Academy, as evidenced by the fact that God instructed Moses, go and assemble the Torah scholars of Israel. Abraham, too, was a scholar and headed a yeshiva.
Did anyone know that Abraham had a yeshiva? And in Egypt, they had a yeshiva? Did anyone know that? Isn't that interesting? This is in the Talmud, straight from a verse. God tells Moses, go to the elders of Israel in Egypt. What do you think the elders of Israel are studying? What do you think they're studying? The elders of Israel, they're sitting there. He says, gather the elders of Israel. And similarly, as we'll see, there are many references that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob studied Torah. They studied Torah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So they studied Torah before the Torah was given, right?
Question.
But, yeah.
So the Egyptians allowed the Jews to practice their religion?
They allowed some of the Jews to practice their religion. There were certain standards in society of, if you want to harass a nation, if you take away their elders, then they will no longer be a nation that you're in control of. They'll simply assimilate. So, there's a certain balance. If you ever conquer another country or government, if you just destroy the government, you won't be able to enforce your power and evil wickedness as much as if you would keep them and sustain them and let them be established as a country, and you'll be in control. So, the answer is they did let them. Now, we're going to see another verse. This is also another verse in Genesis, and this is quite a very fascinating verse. This is in conversation. God says, speaking to Isaac, and he says, let me tell you about your dad. He's such a special guy. David, what does God tell Isaac?
It is because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my mitzvah, my statutes, and my Torah.
Well, you can imagine, this is quite a verbose statement, if you think about it. God says, he listened to my voice. He kept my charge. He kept my safeguards. He did my mitzvahs, my statutes, and my Torahs. So the Talmud takes it apart. Torahs is plural. There's only one Torah. What are the two Torahs it's referring to? Anyone have a guess? Well, there's the written Torah and the oral Torah, right? There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. There's the written Bible, and there's the tradition, which in Judaism, and actually the written Torah says is just as holy. In fact, sometimes if you go against the oral Torah, it's worse than going against the Bible, right? We studied that on our Friday morning class recently about going against prophets. So here you have Abraham. He keeps my voice. Vayishmor mishmarti, the Gemara says. He keeps my safeguards. Well, there's certain mitzvahs we're learning in Maimonides, daily Maimonides we study every morning at 9:15. We're learning about like 1,000 laws about how to make sure you don't carry something in the street. And most of them are safeguards. So here the Talmud says, and they're from the rabbis in the Talmud, Abraham kept the safeguards. This is a verse in the Torah. Kept the safeguards, my mitzvahs, my statutes, which are mitzvahs, which have no reason for them, no logic behind them, and both my Torahs, the written Torah and the oral Torah. Pretty fascinating, yeah.
How do you know it's only two? If it's just plural, it doesn't say.
Well, the Talmud says that's the tradition. It's hinting to the two Torahs. There are two Torahs.
Okay.
The two Torahs are the written and the oral Torah. And that's actually, if you open up a Deuteronomy, it actually alludes to it many times. Many times about there's the two Torahs, the written Torah and the oral Torah. I don't want to go into the science of how the two Torahs work, but here comes the question. So Abraham kept the Torah, right? Now, I'll give you some background. There are 7 laws called the 7 Noahide laws. The 7 Noahide laws, biblically, have to be kept by all humanity, to the extent that court systems in those days would enforce. If you break one of the 7 Noahide laws, you would be brought to court, right? 7 Noahide laws. Not only that, but I believe Ronald Reagan signed a bill a declaration that the Constitution is based on the 7 Noahide laws. And not only that, but I think it's been signed by every president since. It's pretty simple. The United States is based on a God-believing culture, right? Believing in the laws of certain biblical laws. And Judaism, when you break it down, what are those biblical laws of morality? They're the 7 laws God passed on to Noah. Everyone had to keep the 7 Noahide laws. Abraham was special. He said, I'm not going to only keep the 7 Noahide laws. I'm going to keep the whole Torah. The written Torah, the oral Torah, my grandkids, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years from now, I'm going to keep the same stuff as them. Now, this comes a question. What happened when God gave the Torah? God gave the Torah was about 400 years later, right? What happened when God gave the Torah if Abraham already had it? What happened? Anyone have a guess? All right, so I'll show you. Torah observance when Abraham did it was voluntary. Abraham was really, really good guy, and he wanted to go beyond the letter of the law. He wanted to join the secret society of forefathers, right? However, after the giving of the Torah, now the Torah became obligatory. God said, you're going to do this. Jews have to do this. Now, if we read the story in the Torah, it doesn't actually go that way. God doesn't come as a dictator. He says, will you guys accept the Torah? And what do the Jews say? Yes. Nasa v'nishma. We will do it, and then we will understand it. Before even figuring out what the Torah was, they said, well, God is so great, we're going to do the Torah. So, I don't know, maybe you should read the fine print first, right? But they didn't do that. What? You have a question?
So was the one on the left the
This is
spoken
Abraham.
Torah?
Abraham. No, Abraham did the oral and written Torah voluntarily.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people after, they gave up their freedom, and they accepted the obligation, the keeping of the Torah, with all the reward and punishment.
If Abraham had the Torah, how far did his descendants retain it? Did the Jews as slaves in Egypt know about this Torah?
That's a great question. I don't want to go into details so much, but basically Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kept it fully. The 12 tribes kept it a little bit less. A lot of the Jews, some of the Jews, individuals kept it, and a lot didn't in Egypt, but they didn't have to. So what happened was, at the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people had the Torah, and then they gave up their freedom and said, we want it to be obligatory. That's what we're going to discuss today. Now, why would they do that? It's like, let's say you have, unlimited amount of money, and someone comes to you and says, if you become my slave, I'll give you $50 a day, right? And you say yes. You already have $50 in your unlimited stock of money, right? Why would you go and commit yourself to that? And that's what we're going to discuss, because that's really what the Jewish people did, right?
But even with freedom, there's not absolute freedom. You always have some system of laws you work with, because you can't be free to kill your neighbor,
Well, this may be true, but the 7 Noahide laws, God did give not complete freedom of choice, right? He gave the 7 Noahide laws. Jewish people went and they basically said, we will accept the obligation, which we could do anyways, but we're going to accept the obligation on ourselves. We are going to make it that it is no longer voluntary. So that's what we're going to talk about today, why someone would do that. We're all smart people in here. I'm sure we could think of some reasons why and some examples. But yes, Judaism does celebrate duty, having a duty, right? And we're going to give 2 examples, and we'll get back to them at the end after the story, and we'll get some insight. So one example is marriage, right? They say, someone said, you know what I did before I got married? Anything I want, right? Anything I want, right? So when people get married, suddenly they're committed to one person, hopefully, right? They're committed to one person, nobody else. Not only that, but they may need to phone that person if they're running 5 minutes late. If they don't phone that person might build a lot of resentment, right? They can't go on as many trips as they want. They can't spend money the way they want. That's marriage. Marriage is something we commonly see a lot of people do. I mean, some people are into it, some people not. But marriage is something that we do where we go and we limit our choices and accept the duty on ourselves. So that's an example. We'll do another example here. Now, this is kind of an exercise on page 75, and let's see if it works. Okay. So, when it comes to marriage, for a lot of people, it's really hard to pop the question, will you marry me? It's very, very difficult. I'm going to make a commitment. It's true. I love the person. I care about them. But I will be, I don't know what will happen. What if they get sick? What if they have issues? What if things change, right? So that's one thing that we do in marriage. Now here's another example that the JLI took. So here we have, imagine you are the President of the United States for 48 hours. List 10 things that you will do in those 48 hours. No, there's some people I could probably guess what Linda Thompson would do. But anyways, let's see. Can anyone guess? Can anyone think of some ideas? You can think of 3 ideas. Just want to see if this works. Yeah.
Close the border.
Close the border. Okay, that's a good one. Free the slaves. You can shoot them here. Avi, what would you do if you were president for 48 hours?
Of course, I'm focused on healthcare.
Healthcare. Okay. Paul, anything you would do? Balance the budget. Good luck, Nancy.
Education.
Improve the schools.
Improve the schools.
Fire half the people in charge of.
Fire people. Okay, no, that's fun,
Charge of
right?
agencies.
Close the border. What, Linda?
I was gonna
Close the borders.
agree with
You
that.
said also.
Corruption.
And corruption. Drain the swamp, right? Okay, what would you do, Mark?
Drain the swamp.
Okay, Ed, what would you do? It can't be drain the swamp.
I would make an all-out effort to find how to handle the next pandemic.
All right, so these are all great things, and you would all, by the way, make great presidents for 48 hours. So here is what what I think this exercise is trying to tell us. Well, nobody said, hey, the president gets to go golfing, you get to go to the Bahamas,
Camp David.
Camp David, right? You get a personal chef.
Air Force One.
There's a full theater and bowling alley in the White House. You can make a party for your friends. You can make no one said that, right? Everyone just now lined up in the call of duty. We're going to fix this country, right? Now, someone could look at the other way and say, wouldn't you want to have a good time for 48 hours? Imagine you ask some kid and they said, what do you do if you're president for 48 hours? I'd go and have a good time. You'd be like, are you crazy? What do you mean? It's my choice. I'm president, right? I'm president of the United States. There's probably many movies about that. So here we are. You guys are all willing to give up your time and energy to help other people, right? You're essentially giving up your choice. So this is a human quality of giving up your choice and your time, which you could have an amazing time. I mean, the White House, I don't know if you wanted to go to a water park or order out food or whatever it is, you could probably do all of that. Helicopter rides. But here you are, you all want to fix things in this country. So that's commendable. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to try and analyze these two cases and the giving the Torah and understand what it means to give up our freedom. So why do we, under certain circumstances, willing to forgo our freedoms? Now, I know we can all think of some answers to this, but we're going to kind of get to the core of it from Ruth and see what Ruth has to say. Yeah.
Now, why would anybody want to forego their freedoms? mean,
I don't know, maybe you want to drain the swamp, right? You want to fix healthcare, you want to... Can you imagine like some like teenager winning President 48 Hours and going and like, you know, I don't know, using
Order
the
pizza.
monument as a skate park? I don't know, you know what I thought someone would come with something creative. Okay. So here we're going to talk about a very famous decision points in the story. We said in the story started off with Ruth, as there was a famine in Israel. So Elimelech, who we'll talk about soon, by the way, Elimelech was not an idiot. He was considered one of the higher nobles of Israel, both materially and spiritually. He was very wealthy. He moves to Moab. Ruth follows her mother-in-law, and Boaz agrees to Ruth. These are all three significant parts of the story, which we're going to analyze. So let's go with text
I
3a.
got a question.
Yes,
So Elimelech,
Elimelech.
Elimelech was so respected, but he left. He deserted Israel, went to a pagan country.
Everyone wanted his money. Here, let's see. Let's read it. Vahi b'mei shveit hashoftim. Do you want to read Paul 3a?
It happened in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem of Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife was Naomi, and his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, distinguished personalities from Bethlehem of Judah. They arrived in Moab and remained there.
All right. So story starts off. Elimelech and his Naomi and Machlon and Chilion, they are living in Israel under severe famine. So they bounce. Now they bounce to, they go to Moab. Now let's read the next text, 3b. Again, if you don't want to read, you can always say pass. This is from the Midrash, Ruth Rabbah.
Elimelech was one of the great people of the land and of the leaders of the generation. When a famine struck, he said to himself, all of Israel will now camp at my doorway, each person with his or her basket begging for alms. So he stood up and fled.
All right, so the Midrash explains, says Elimelech was a wealthy guy. It was a time of severe famine. Everyone's knocking at his door. I can't take this anymore. Everyone's going to take all my money. Everyone's going to take all my food. So he gets up and he leaves. And that's what he does with his family. Now, you know, he basically left to protect his wealth. Also, you know, if you think about it, protect his family, right? Maybe he didn't want his family to fall. And he said, you know, I got my 2 sons. I can go and I can... you know, I can go and make them good, make them big. So that was his, so this is Elimelech. So he's wealthy, he's a leader of high standing, and you don't like him. Okay, he flees famine to save his wealth. He chose personal comfort over obligation. Everyone agree with these statements here? Well, you know, what do you think about his decision, right or wrong?
Well, for himself, it was the right thing, but
For himself, it was the right thing, so what do you think?
his family.
His obligation was to take care of his family.
So he's like, I'm taking care of my family. You know, everyone needs my money here. Everyone's suffering. I'm taking care of my family. All right. You know, what do you think? Okay. So, I mean, it's hard to say that he's really, really fully wrong, right? He might talk to me to have an excuse. But we could all say, you know, you're wealthy. Help the people as much as you can, right? That would be the other side to it. You know, but obviously he put himself and his family first, right? Is that right? Is that wrong? These are all questions to think about. What do you think we could have done to keep Elimelech in Israel?
Meeting president.
Make it president.
No.
Make sure everybody, I say this today, everyone needs to be prepared for times like this, and each person should be responsible for.
All right, but already,
that.
well, maybe that's what he was teaching. He was saying like, I'm going so you guys all learn to take care of yourselves.
Mhm.
Would you, yeah.
If there was a legal authority that had power in his area, they might have said something like, you should contribute to help the community, but will also protect your wealth in case times really get bad. He had no protection. Did he have any protection? From
That's a good point. Well, I feel like we all feel like maybe Elimelech could defend himself, but he should try to help his community as well. That's an important priority. He was a leader. He was actually a leader. So that is Elimelech. Okay, now let me just tell you what happens. He goes to Moab, and the next thing we know, there's not a lot of details in the beginning of the story. The main story that Samuel is writing is Ruth, and we'll see later why. He says basically he dies and his sons die, leaving 2 widows. What happens is they hear that there's no more famine. I mean, they're really struggling. They lose all their money. They lose their husbands, Ruth and Orpah and Naomi. And they hear that in Israel there's food again. So they all head back to Israel. All 3 of them head back to Israel. And now we'll see what happens. Actually, if you read in the Midrash, it's very fascinating. Naomi knows that her daughters-in-law aren't going to want to leave her. And what they actually do is they actually, she sneaks out in the morning and they find her and they catch up to her and everything like that. She has her 2 daughters-in-law. Now, I just want to take an elephant out of the room and address an important question. So Machlon and Chilion, they got married to Ruth and Orpah. Let us say they were Moabite princesses. Now, did they convert to Judaism or not? So it's actually a very interesting discussion. I will tell you a couple details of the discussion. It's not the main subject for today. A lot of the commentaries say it has to be, in those days it had to be that they converted to Judaism. But what point did they convert to Judaism? Well, so actually in the Zohar it says Ruth converted to Judaism when she went to Israel. So that means that her husband was married to her, she wasn't Jewish. And people prove, and they say, well, there's a lot of things we learn, a lot of rules of converts we learn from Ruth when she went to Israel, that Naomi pushed her away. And in Judaism, the tradition is, the law is when someone's to convert, we push them away. We tell them that there's no need to convert. And we tell them, well, why would you want to become a Jew, frankly? So ultimately, elsewhere in the Zohar, it says Ruth and Orpah did convert. When they married Machlon and Chilion, they did convert to Judaism. However, some of the people felt it was questionable. Did they convert out of real desire or just to marry? Right? Now, if someone converts just to marry, you enter a difficult discussion. And usually when someone does that, the rabbi, if he's a reputable rabbi, he will dig into them to make sure that they really, really want to convert to Judaism. So what happened is Orpah was walking with them, and she was thinking in her head, when they converted, did they really mean it or not? Let's see right now. So let's read the next verses, text 4.
Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, each of you, return to your mother's home. May God show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May God grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Naomi kissed them, and they wept aloud. But they said to her, "No, we wish to return with you to your people." Naomi responded, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you come with me? I'm not going to have any more sons who could become your husbands. Return to your homes, my daughters. Go your way." They raised their voices and wept again. Orpah. Then kissed her mother-in-law and departed back to Moab. But Ruth, that's easy to say, clung to her. Naomi said to Ruth, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Follow her." Ruth responded, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. I swear to God that nothing but death will part me from you. When Naomi saw that Ruth was absolutely determined to go with her, she stopped pressing her to return. The two women went on until they came to Bethlehem.
Okay, so here we have Ruth and Orpah, both Moabite princesses. So Naomi says to Ruth and Orpah, she says, go back home to your family, right? So Orpah over here, she goes back to her princess life, probably to their idolatry, to their gods. Ruth says, no, I'm coming to you, I'm coming with you, I'm sticking with your people, with your God, right? Orpah goes back, she sacrifices her world life and joins the Jewish people. Okay, so who do you think is right? I just want to see, who do you think is right here? Or are they both kind of right? Well, let's look at Orpah for a second. I mean, after all, who's she following anyways? Her mother-in-law? It's just her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law says, I won't have another son. Now, in Jewish law, and this is actually one of the things which is discussed, they must have been Jewish. In Jewish law, there is the law of a levirate marriage, yibum. Yibum means that when a man passes away, a married man passes away, before he has children, the wife, the widow, has to marry his brother. And actually is already, the moment he dies, is technically married to his brother until she goes through a chalitza process, which we'll talk about this a little bit later. So she says, I'm not going to have another son. You're not going to be able to marry the third brother, right? Even though they're much older. But I'm not going to have another son. You're not going to marry the third brother. So she says, go back. So Orpah does something very logical. She says, I'm going back to my family. It was a nice ride. My mother-in-law's nice. My husband was nice, but it's done. I'm going back to my family. Ruth says, no, I'm staying with you. I'm not going back to my family. I'm not going back to my royal way of life. That's what happens here. We can see that Ruth is sacrificing for something she feels is really important. And maybe Orpah's being somewhat logical or comfortable. That's maybe a more comfortable option.
Well, that would be an argument for she converted just because of marriage.
Yeah, correct. She's like, this nice getting into Judaism and everything, but I'm done with it, right? So Orpah goes back, and we said later who was her grandson. And I remember you seen the video, who was her grandson? Goliath. So can you believe it? King David and Goliath are semi-related, right? Semi-related. That adds to the fire, right? They aren't really related because they're David's great-grandmother and her, that's from a different husband, and they're not sisters, right?
By marriage.
They were sister-in-laws by marriage.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so anyways, Orpah returns to her family, goes back to comfort, and Ruth sacrifices everything, and again, she's going to come to Judaism and going to take a lot upon herself, So Ruth, you could say she rises to the call of duty. Again, we don't force people to convert, and we tell people that there's no need to convert, and it is true Jewish belief. We don't say, well, if that person would convert, they'd be better. We believe that people, in the way they're created, we don't proselytize people to convert. So let's go more into this story. Now, in order to get in the story, we're going to enter some halacha, some Jewish law. Now, it gets very tricky. So let's go, text 5a.
No Ammonite or Moabite, not even a 10th generation descendant of those nations, may ever be admitted to the assembly of God. This is on account of the fact that they did not come to greet you with bread and water on your way when you left Egypt, and also because they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in Aram Naharaim, to curse you. Wow.
Yeah, so let me just go through this verse here. Kind of brings it back a lot of... Okay, who is Moab and Ammon? Who are the patriarchs of this family? So if you go back into Genesis, God destroys Sodom. And Lot escapes. His wife is told not to look back. She looks back, and what happens to her?
Salt.
Pillar of salt, right? And you can actually go see that pillar of salt. I don't know if you can actually go there today, security, but there are these pillars of salt, which are fantastic pillars of salt. And actually, I went to give a class on it. I researched. We have documentation going back thousands of years of different rabbis talking about the pillars of salt, which are Lot's wife. Okay, so Lot has these two daughters. They go and they hide in the mountain, and they feel the world is destroyed. So what do? We have to procreate, just like Adam's sons had to marry their sisters, right? Because we have to procreate. Who can we procreate with? Our father, Lot. But he won't do it. It's against the Noahide laws. So they get him really drunk. Anyways, he gets really drunk, and he impregnates his first daughter. The next night, it actually, Rashi in the Torah says, he knows what happened, but he lets himself get really drunk again. And he has a second grandson. And one is named Moab, which is from the father. Moab, that's really what Moab spells out, from the father. And, okay. So now, the Torah says when the Jewish people are passing through, they call out to certain, now, again, so Lot was cousin with Abraham. So I guess we're kind of cousins with Ammon and Moab, going way back. The Jewish people call out to certain nations and say, hey, can we pass through? And they say no, or they don't greet them nicely. And Moab doesn't greet them nicely. So the Torah says a Gentile can convert to Judaism. However, if they are from Ammon or Moab or Amalek, they cannot convert. If they're Egyptian, they can convert into Jewish Egyptians and marry another Egyptian convert. And they can marry another, their kids can marry Egyptian converts for 3 generations, and then they can join the regular Jewish nation. So these are the interesting laws of the nations which convert. So Moab cannot convert. Now, story number 2, the Jewish people are coming through, and it's not enough that they don't greet them, but they hire Bilam the sorcerer. He's a prophet to curse the Jewish people. They say, hey, the Jewish people, the only thing they got is Moses. Moses protecting them, and Moses is a prophet. So they say, well, we'll get a prophet to fight their prophet. And that his name is Bilam. And Bilam's a sorcerer, and of course we know the story in the Torah. He opens his mouth to curse, and what comes out? Blessings. Blessings come out. And this is in the Parsha of Balak, amazing Parsha. The Zohar says the Jews didn't even know that was happening. And it says Jews should always know. We never fully know what's happening around us, but God watches over us a lot. Anyways, Bilam fails to curse the Jewish people. So what does he do? He tells the Moabite king, he said, and the Midianite kid, he says, if you get your women to get the men, the Jewish men, God doesn't like that. Then God will punish them. So that's what he does. So because they hired Bilam, and because they didn't greet the Jewish people, therefore they are not allowed to convert to Judaism. Now, today, if you ever meet a convert, you can ask them, are you from Moab or Ammon? Now, I can guarantee they will say no, or they will say the true answer, which is, I don't know. What happened was during the first temple, there was a king named Sennacherib, also known as Shalmaneser, times of Isaiah and Hezekiah, and he went and he basically mixed all the nations up in the Middle East. He exiled 10 tribes and mixed all the nations up. So at that time, there was no one in the world who can date their lineage, except for Jewish people, by the way, who can date from that region, who can date their lineage pre that era. So everyone got mixed up. So at that point, the rabbis say, well, when someone comes to convert, we can't prove their lineage, so we can assume they come from the majority of Gentiles who are allowed to convert. But Moabites can't convert. So now we got Ruth. She's a Moabite. She converts. How could that be? So for that, I think we're up to Esther, page 81, text 5b.
An Ammonite is excluded from marrying into the assembly of God, but not an Ammonitis, a Moabite, but not a Moabitis. Although normally when the Bible employs the masculine tense in the course of an instruction, it refers equally to males and females. This instance is different because the verse stipulates the reason for the prohibition, the fact that they did not come to greet you with bread and water. It is the convention for men, not women, to greet travelers with provisions.
All right, what we just read is an excerpt from the Talmud Yevamos. Very interesting. So the Torah, generally speaking, whenever it says a male has to do something, it applies to women as well. Now, someone once asked me, they said, you look in Genesis, everything's he, and he said this. Why doesn't it say, and she said it? Gender neutral. So I said, well, God isn't technically a he or a she. And he can actually identify as whoever he wants, and I'm going to respect whoever he identifies as. Right? God wants to identify as a he, that's fine with me. So now when the Torah says most laws, you cannot convert, doesn't matter male or female, most laws in the Torah, there's actually, very interestingly, there's only a few laws which women don't do, which men do in the Torah. And it's actually a very interesting method, a very interesting route of study. So here it says a Moabite cannot convert. The Talmud says if it wouldn't give a reason, so a female Moabite wouldn't be able to convert. But it gives a reason. They didn't greet the Jewish people. And who greets the Jewish people in those days? The women mainly stayed home. It was the guys. So the Torah, by giving us a reason, wasn't trying to rile up our resentment. The Torah was trying to teach us that a female Moabite can convert. Now, in the history, this is in the Jewish tradition of how to analyze that verse, going back to Moses. However, historically, it was actually questioned until King David became king. It's a very long story, but until King David became king, that premise was questioned by Jews. But that is correct, the Talmud says. The Talmud says anyone who says otherwise is incorrect. But it wasn't popular because the Moabites and the Jewish people didn't get along for millennia. So, generally speaking, there were other marriage problems besides conversion. It was just they didn't really get along. Yes?
Did David have, of course, the Talmud came out hundreds of years after David ruled. So I would think that there would be, did people know that his grandmother was Ruth?
So people did, and I don't want to go into the story too much, but David's father was worried always. Maybe I'm not Jewish because my grandmother was Ruth. Jesse always thought that. And when David was, and he was worried that his kids weren't Jewish. And there's this fascinating story in the Midrash, which I'm not going to go into right now. But when Samuel came and coronated David, he said, "Oh, I am Jewish. This is true." Because even though, as we'll see in the story, Ruth converted according to Jewish law, there were people back then who questioned. And there was media, the media also was putting fake notions, indicting people who were Moabite women, right? So it was a hot topic back then. Okay, now there's another idea that we're going to share. And I mentioned this before, this is a levirate marriage. So Jewish law, a Jew may not marry a Moabite, levirate marriage, okay, now we have the levirate law. Now we're going to see the levirate law, generally speaking, is as follows. A man marries a lady, a man dies. Now the lady has to marry his brother. Now, he's actually technically married to the brother already. In order to get out of that, he has to do what's called in the Bible a chalitza. Chalitza means he puts on a shoe, special shoe, and synagogues used to have these shoes, special biblical shoes. And actually, if you want to see, it's pretty cool, you can watch the video online of a modern day chalitza. And she would come and say, "I don't want to get married to you and establish the name of your brother." Take off the shoe and spit in front of him. And this is what the Bible says. And they no longer have to get married anymore. You can watch the videos online. They're quite fascinating. The reason why I find them fascinating is because you could see in the olden days, the wording of the Jewish law, what they say, you could see that there was a certain level. People weren't so into love back then. People were more into, establishing a family. So it was like almost a sad thing if it didn't happen. Nowadays you see like a random guy, a random lady, his sister-in-law, there is zero emotion there, and they're just like doing this thing because until the lady does it, she is not allowed to get married to anybody else. Now I will note that Jewish law nowadays, we never do a levirate marriage. We always do the chalitza. We always have them do the chalitza. That's what we always do because there are other complications and we don't have an established rabbinical court system. So we always do the chalitza. I even know someone whose brother died and he was a kid. So now he's married to his sister-in-law, right? So he had to do the chalitza, but he had to wait till he was 13. So they waited till he was 13 and she did it and she actually got married to someone else and etc. Now he's grown up, he's a Chabad rabbi somewhere. Okay.
Did she have to wait till he was 13?
Yes, she cannot get married because she's married to him, right? There's no romance or anything here. They're just halachically married. Okay, so that is the law, and that's just a quick summary of the law. Now, the rabbis actually talk about how this was not only a Jewish law, This was like a very practical, beautiful thing that they would do, believe it or not. When someone would die, they would say like, oh, like he had no children. You will inherit him and we'll set up children in his name, right? And that's what they would do. So now we're going to read from the Ramban. And the Ramban is Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. He's talking about in Genesis, you have the story of Judah. So Yehuda and Tamar, which is another controversial story. Tamar marries Judah's son, he dies. She marries the next son, he dies. Now she's waiting for the third son to grow up. And Judah says she's a black widow, right? Anyways, not going into the story there too much. The Ramban over there, this is what he discusses, and he says something very interesting. Next person, student page 82, text 6.
Levirate marriage touches upon a great secret of the Torah. Ancient sages, even before the giving of the Torah, were aware of the great benefit for the soul of the deceased of having his brother wed the widow, and that to an extent the progeny of that union perpetuates the soul of the deceased man. The brother is the first in line to marry the widow and takes precedence over all other relatives. But if he is unable to do so, it is beneficial for any relative who is an inheritor of the deceased to do so. The closer the relative, the greater the benefit. The early Jewish sages were cognizant of this and introduced the practice of levirate marriage for all inheritors, except for such relatives such as the deceased father, whose union with the widow is prohibited by the Torah. This marriage is known as Geula, redemption.
All right, so this is a very interesting Ramban. So we talk nowadays, someone dies, marry the brother-in-law. It's so interesting. Actually, the Arizal writes that a lot of times the soul would reincarnate, of the father would reincarnate in the child. However, the Ramban says a very interesting thing. He says the Torah says this is the law, and you have to do a chalitza, right? You have to do the taking off of the shoe to disconnect the marriage. He says, however, in those times, actually pre-Torah, people kept to this, as we see with Yehuda and Tamar. Tamar marries one brother, another brother. And it was a very practical, beautiful thing. Take his estate and establish his estate under his name. You're the brother. Take responsibility for your brother. He continues and extends. He says, not only is it the technical brothers, like in Jewish law, but even Judaism, there was a tradition called Geula. Anyone know what the word Geula means in Hebrew? Not doing my job. Geula means redemption. Mashiach coming is called the Geula. Redemption. It's called redemption. So here's what you'd have. You'd have like a uncle or a cousin. The closest relative would marry the widow. He would marry the widow and say, hey, look, he has no brothers around, but I'm the closest relative. Let me redeem her and her property and everything like that and her deceased husband. So here back, we go in the story to Ruth. And what happens is they get back, Ruth goes, and they get back to Israel. And just mind you, everyone's like, oh, look who's back, Elimelech's wife. Everyone's like whispering around, the verses say. No one's inviting them to their house to stay or anything like that. And but everyone's quite excited. The great Elimelech who abandoned us in a famine, now there's food, now his widow comes back. And everyone's like, oh, who's this lady, Ruth, right? So she goes, and in Jewish law, there is a law of leket shikha and peah. Peah means you have to leave a corner of your field to tzedakah. Besides tithing and all that stuff, when you're harvesting, you have to leave a corner of your field. Leket and shikha means if you forget something in the field, or you're gathering bundles and one piece falls, you leave it there for poor people. So in those times, they have no food, and Ruth, her mother-in-law is old, she goes to the fields and she's collecting food for her mother-in-law. And in fact, Boaz sees her and he says, who is this like regal lady? She's like so righteous. He notes that she's very, very modest. The way she bends down is not the way everyone else bends down. And she's very, very modest, and you can see she's a very special lady, a very special convert. And he goes and he starts telling people, hey, leave some extra food for her. But now what happens is, Naomi says, by the way, Ruth, Boaz is our relative. He is Elimelech's nephew, and he could be your Goel. he could redeem you. So she takes things into her own hands and she tells Ruth, dress yourself up beautifully and go to Boaz, maybe he'll marry you. So that's what we're going to read text 7 on page 83. Ed, if you can read that.
It was at midnight, and Boaz was startled. He turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she responded. Spread your wing over your servant, for you are my family redeemer. Boaz responded, Blessed are you, God, my daughter. Do not fear now, my daughter. I will do for you all that you ask. For it is public knowledge you are a woman of noble character. However, although I am a redeeming relative, there is a relative closer than I. Stay the night, and in the morning I will speak to him. If he redeems you, well, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, as God lives, I will redeem you. Now lie here until morning.
So here's what Boaz does. So Ruth comes and he sees this refined convert, Elimelech's daughter-in-law. Boaz is actually Ruth's first cousin through her previous marriage, right? And he says, indeed, I am your Goel. I am a relative. And she comes and she dresses up, gets straight to the point, and she says, marry me. You are my Goel. And he says, that's a great idea, but wait until morning. Probably gave her a bed to sleep on. And so wait until morning because I am not the nearest relative to you. And therefore, in order for me to marry and be the Goel, you first have to give priority to someone else. Now, they did have land in Israel. They still own some land in Israel. And he would first have to go and give priority to the nearest relative. So here we actually have a family tree over here. So here we have Nachshon. They all come from Nachshon ben Aminadab. He's a famous biblical character. He's one of the leaders of the tribes. One of the most famous things he's famous for is, anyone know what he did?
Is that the tribe of Judah?
You know, I want to just thank Linda Thompson sent me, Ben Shapiro said like a statement from last week's class on social media. It was almost like he was here. It was almost like he was here. This is it. Someone asked him, they said, what's your favorite biblical character? He said, Nachshon ben Aminadab. What did Nachshon ben Aminadab do? Ed, do you remember?
He walked into the Red Sea.
He walked into the Red Sea.
That's a great story.
So what happens is God says, go! And Moses says, go! And everyone says, what do you mean? And one guy goes in and the whole sea splits. And in tradition, God said, I'm going to split it because of him, because he had faith that it's going to split. He went until his nose, actually. Just on another note, the Rebbe once was coming up with some campaign. So after the Rebbe spoke about it, all the Hasidim gathered. How are we going to implement this new campaign of the Rebbe? And it's sitting there, it's too expensive, it's too hard. How about you? I got a job, my family. They weren't able to do it. So the Rebbe asked the secretary, can you find out how the meeting went? So the secretary came back, and the Rebbe said, how'd the meeting go? And the secretary didn't really want to say they weren't doing what the Rebbe, whatever campaign the Rebbe was trying to initiate, but so he was kind of quiet, so the Rebbe said, tell them that if they were at the splitting of the sea, it wouldn't have split. Because sometimes you got to take the dive. When God says go, you got to take the dive. Anyway, so Nachshon was all these kids. Okay, going a few generations. Naomi is questionable. She's for sure related to Elimelech. She may be cousins with him. It's not clear. But we have these brothers here. Salmon, Ploni, Elimelech. Right? Now, Ploni now we have Salmon has a child called Boaz. So that makes Machlon and Boaz first cousins. Ruth's previous husband, deceased husband, are first cousins, right? So she's kind of first cousins. Now, Ploni is an uncle, old guy, which is still alive. And it says Boaz is old, so he must be really old. But that wasn't a problem back then. Ploni is still alive. So Boaz says, I cannot marry you. I cannot redeem you, which is a good thing. I want to do it. I cannot do it until this guy over here is asked. Now, I just want to tell you, in modern Hebrew, Ploni, anyone know what Ploni means? Ploni means John Doe in Hebrew. Ploni Almoni, because some say that wasn't his real name. It didn't want to say his real name. It just wanted to, but either way, if you say like Ploni, that means John Doe came in, so-and-so. Ploni is so-and-so in Hebrew. Okay, so that is the chart here. So Boaz he says, let's go, and he wants to do it publicly because also he knows Ruth is a Moabite. She's a Moabitess. He wants to make sure everybody knows this is a permitted marriage, right? So he's like, I'm going to do this publicly, and also I don't want anyone to think that this is forbidden. And also he says, I don't want Plony or to think I'm trying to get the land or whatever it is. I want to offer him fully. So we're going to see what he does. Next text, Ivy, I think, right?
Boaz said,
Yeah, you have a question?
Which is quick. So, wasn't it part of the problem that women weren't able to inherit? Were they able to inherit?
A woman is able to inherit so as long as there's no man. So as long as there's no
So
son,
if
right?
the wife dies, she could inherit.
Well, wives do get certain
husband
rights
dies.
from the,
Husband
yeah,
dies.
wives do get certain rights. Generally speaking, back then, if a husband died, so the wife can get her sustenance from that. She can choose to get her ketubah or to get her sustenance from that. Either way, it's kind of like if Ruth dies, then and Naomi dies and there's no grandchildren or anything, then it's just going to go to the government, and no one wants that to happen, right? So he's going to go over and he's going to make an offer to Plony, and that's what Ivy's going to read.
Boaz said, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased. And Ruth is only willing to sell if you also assume the obligation to perpetuate the name of her deceased husband on his property, if you marry her. The kinsman said, then I cannot redeem it myself. Least I imperil my own heritage. You assume my redemption responsibility, for I cannot redeem it myself.
All right, so let me just go through a little bit. So there's ancestral land in Israel, and if you sell it at a certain time, there's a certain deadline, your relatives can actually forcefully buy it and keep it in the family, right? So Boaz says to Plony, he says, they're going to sell this land because they're poor. And, you're the next one in line who can have the ability to redeem it, which is a good thing, right? But he says, she's willing to sell it to you if you will take her in, right? So what does Plony say? So in other words, he says, instead of them selling it, redeeming it, how about you just marry her? And then it'll stay in the family. The land will stay in the family, and you'll be married to a nice lady. So Boaz says, I don't want to ruin my heritage and have like this Moabitess. Now, the commentators say he knew that she was Jewish, but is she really Jewish? Again, the media, everyone questioned this for another probably 100 years. Everyone still questioned if she was Jewish. So Boaz was very confident in the Jewish law. He was a big rabbi. Plony was kind of like, okay, like you're saying she's Jewish, but I don't want that line in my family. So he doesn't do it, and as we'll see, Boaz gets married to her. Okay, so let's just go into this a little bit. So we got Plony over here. Essentially what he says is he doesn't want to hurt his reputation, right? Now we know here that it's fine. Boaz is confident in the law. He's unconcerned about his reputation. Believe it or not, a lot of times in the Jewish matchmaking system, and all systems, people say, that family, they have a bad reputation, or that person has a bad reputation, right? Actually, what we find is we don't have any recorded legacy from Plony. And he did that. He said, I don't want to hurt my family name. And Boaz, on the other hand, as we'll see, he has a grandson, great-grandson, named David, and comes from this marriage, as we'll see in the end of the book. So here we have also a similar thing. We have Plony kind of caring about how he's going to look, and Boaz, he's like, no, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do it. I want to help this widow and help her financially and everything like that, and that's what he does. Here we have these similar things. Who's right, who's wrong? Well, it seems like they have two different outlooks, right? They have two different outlooks. One is kind of caring more about his name, his family, and the other one is like, no, I feel like this is the right thing. Doesn't matter about my name. So now we will, they both felt it was an obligation. But Plony said, hey, if you'll do it, I'll back out. Okay, so now let's go and continue the story. We're going to finish the story soon and then kind of dig into it a little bit more. Next text, text 9. David?
Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he was intimate with her. God saw to it that she became pregnant, and she bore a son. Naomi took the child and placed him in her bosom, and she became his caregiver. The women of the neighborhood said, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse and the father of David.
All right, so this goes straight to the end of the book. It says they had a baby. By the way, Boaz was very old, and it wasn't clear that he would, but they had a baby named Obed. Naomi gets her grandchild, and grandchild grows up, has a son named Jesse, and Yishai has King David, right? So that's how the story goes. Okay, so now, yeah.
So it's interesting, why didn't Ruth take care of the baby? It says,
Some grandmothers are just like that.
Naomi took care
I
of the
don't
baby
know.
and they thought it was Naomi.
I don't know. I'm not sure, but some grandmothers are just like that. I mean,
But they gave her credit for having
Or-
given birth, but she didn't, Naomi.
correct.
That's what I'm saying.
Correct. No, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Okay. So now we're going to get into the custom of Ruth and Shavuos. Why do we read Ruth on Shavuos? This is an ancient tradition. Now, there's two traditions in the Jewish tradition. One is that we read the actual Megillah at synagogue on Shavuos. The other tradition is we don't read the Megillah, but we study it around Shavuos. It's relevant to Shavuos. Everyone agrees it's relevant to Shavuos. It has a special relationship with Shavuos. The question is the technicality, if you read the Megillah or not, and that's another discussion. So number one, there's different reasons ancient commentaries give. One of them says, well, we're all converts. When we got the Torah, we all converted to Judaism. In fact, we learn many laws of conversion from the Jewish people when they got the Torah. The fact you need to go to mikvah, offer sacrifices, accept all the mitzvahs, these are the fundamental conditions of conversion. So we're all converts. So we read the story of Ruth. It's like inspiring for us. We see a lady who leaves everything. King David's birthday and yahrzeit is on Shavuos. King David was born and died on Shavuos. He lived 70 years. And we read it because, well, this is King David's background. And there's actually such cool stories about the background of King David and going back to Ruth. We can talk about that another time. Another thing is she's willing to suffer for the Torah, teaching us how committed we need to be to the Torah. We need to be willing to make sacrifices to give the Torah. Just like Ruth, she left her royal home and luxury and her hometown in order to come to Israel with nothing. She's literally picking up the handouts, and that was her commitment to becoming a Jew. And she tells her mother-in-law, no matter what, I will stick it out. Also, we read it was harvest season, and Shavuos is Chag HaBikurim, which is the harvest season festival. So all these are reasons why we do it. Another thing is we see in the story about Boaz and the kindness and charity, and those things are also related to the giving of the Torah. Torah brings kindness to the world. So these are the different reasons brought, and they're brought in the Midrash and everything like that. And we'll kind of see, I'm not going to go into them too much, but we'll see kind of the underlying idea and how Ruth and the conversion of Ruth and Ruth coming relates to our relationship with the giving of the Torah. And as we said long before, we said that the forefathers had the Torah, but it was voluntary. And now it's obligatory. So before that, let's go and so we know that Ruth, she definitely, we got these characters here. We got Elimelech, Orpah, and Plony, and the way we portrayed it is they both kind of followed personal comfort. Elimelech was like, man, everyone's knocking at my door here. This is too expensive. Orpah said, you're right, let me go back to my family. This is going to be too hard. And Plony said, oh, this is going to besmirch my name, right? This is not going to look good in my family. Ruth, on the other hand, she goes and she leaves everything, converts to Judaism, joins the Jewish nation. And Boaz, although he knows the risk and he knows what people are saying, he knows the truth, and he marries her and has a child. So we have the personal comfort and responsibility. Okay, so what do you think is the key traits which make somebody choose from personal comfort and responsibility?
Well,
Belief.
there's another quality I think that Ruth and Boaz share. They're both risk takers.
They're risk takers. They are risk takers.
They believe.
They have a lot of belief. Yeah.
I was just saying the same thing, faith.
They have a lot of faith. Someone could say they're selfless. You know, they're selfless. You know, there are, you know, sometimes selfless people take more risks. Sometimes, you know, but yeah, these are all true. They had maybe more faith. Their minds maybe were more like black and white. You know, here's some of them. They both felt that there was a mission they needed to fulfill. They both felt like, I can't just take care of myself. There's a greater picture here. Ruth is like, I got to become a Jew. Boaz is like, I have to marry her. And they both felt there's a mission, there's responsibility, there's a duty on us. The other ones felt like, no, survival of the fittest. We got to take care of ourselves, got to take care of our back. Okay, now what do you think is better? If you need to do something and you do it, or if you don't need to do something and you do it? What do you think is better? This is a theoretical question. Doesn't say to ask that question here. This is my question. I'm just curious.
Well, if you don't, like if you don't need to do it, like if you're gonna fall off a cliff or something, no, that's not good. But you're doing it because you believe it's right. You don't.
All right, let me
need
ask
to
the
do
question
it.
differently. What's better? Doing something of responsibility or volunteering for something?
It's a trick question.
Well, the truth is, any trick question, there's two sides to the coin. It's like, you know, if someone says, wow, I'm a hero, I paid my taxes, you know? It's like, no, you have to pay your taxes. You know, you finally got around to it, right? If someone says, or, you know, sometimes you might say like, you know, something like, that person didn't need to do it and he did the right thing. He didn't have to, you know, give charity. And he did it, he volunteered himself. You have to do it because you have a mitzvah to tithe, right? So which one is better? We're going to actually see, this is a straight up excerpt in the Talmud. Yeah.
It just seems like people get more credit and they're more considered more heroes if they didn't have to do it and they put themselves out there. But then our firefighters, our police, they're doing their jobs, but they're still heroes because they are doing those jobs, even though it's their...
So there are two sides, and we're going to see there are two sides in the Torah. And that's where we're going to read this excerpt in the Talmud. This is a real famous one. Who are after, Paul?
Yes.
Okay, text number 10.
Rabbi Yosef, who was blind, said, I used to say, if anyone tells me that the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that a blind person is exempt from all the Torah's commandments, I will make a festive banquet for the rabbis, because that would mean that I am not obligated to do the mitzvot, and yet I fulfill them anyhow. Now, however, I have heard that Rabbi Hanina said that one who is obligated until fulfills is greater than one who fulfills through, though not obligated to do so. On the contrary, therefore, if anyone tells me that the halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, I will make a festive banquet for the rabbis.
So this is a famous statement for Rabbi Yosef. Let me, Rav Yosef, let me decipher it. Rav Yosef was blind. He heard that Rabbi Yehuda said that if you're blind, you're exempt from all the mitzvahs. You're exempt from doing the mitzvahs. Here he is. He says, wow, this is what I thought. I thought like, wow, this is so special. I don't have to do anything, and I'm doing it anyways. I don't have to keep Shabbos, I'm doing it anyways. This is amazing. He said, then I heard the statement of Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Hanina said, Gadol mitzuva v'aisa mimisha ina mitzuva v'aisa. Someone who's commanded and does it is greater than someone who is not commanded and does it. Now he says, if somebody says the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, who says blind people are exempt from mitzvahs, then I'll make a feast, right? Because now I have to do mitzvahs. If I'm living a life that I don't have to do it, and I'm doing it anyways, it's not as good as if I was obligated and God commanded me to do it. We view mitzvahs, a mitzvah is not a good deed. A mitzvah is a commandment from God. In order to have a commandment, you need a commander, right? So God commands us to do the mitzvahs. When we do a mitzvah, we're following God. So Rabbi Yosef said, when Rabbi Yehuda said that blind people are exempt from mitzvahs, I thought, I'm a volunteer. I'm doing it for free, right? I'm not even getting paid. I'm so dedicated, I should make a feast. But Rabbi Chanina said, no, volunteers are not as good as people who are obligated. And therefore, I will make a feast if I find out the law is that blind people are obligated to do the mitzvah, right? So here we have two theories of Rav Yossi. Two theories. In the beginning, he thought that a volunteer is better because a volunteer does have an advantage. If something is optional and you do it anyways, that shows your commitment. It shows you're really committed to the cause, right? If you have to do it, well, maybe you're not so committed, right? So now we're going to look at it how Judaism looks at it, and we'll analyze the statement. Gadol mitzvah vaisa mimi she'enoi mitzvah vaisa. When we're looking at the Torah, if God would say like, hey, here guys, I got a bunch of recommendations of how to spend your time. If you want, you can do mitzvahs. What would God essentially be saying? What would I say to God? I would say, is it essential? No, it's not essential. It's if you want. Do you need me to do it? No. Is it important? Yes. If it's important, then why didn't you need it? Why? It's not essential, right? Important, if you need it, then it's important. If God doesn't need it, I don't need to do it, right? If God doesn't need the mitzvah, then I don't need to do it. If it's not essential to God, then I don't need to do it, right? So when God comes to the Jewish people after giving the Torah, what is God telling them? He's actually saying, Abraham did it voluntarily. From now on, I am showing you this is your purpose. Your purpose is essential to me. Your purpose is essential to me. I need you to do the mitzvahs in order to create the relationship that we both need. This is God telling us, you have a purpose which I need, which is essential to me. So this is what happens with Rabbi Yosef, and this is what happens with the Torah. The Jewish people, Abraham's doing the mitzvahs voluntarily. Suddenly God comes one day to the Jewish people and he says, will you accept that this is essential to me and that I need it and this is of prime importance to me and you have to do it because it's so important? What do you think the Jewish people said? The Jewish people said, it's important to you? Of course we want to be important to you. Of course we want to be needed by you. Of course we want to feel we have a mission. If you look at it the other way, you'd say like, I want the freedom to do what I want. I don't want to do the mitzvahs. It's essentially saying, well, my choices aren't really that important to my mission. My choices don't really matter. They don't really make a difference. God, at the giving of the Torah, was not about giving the mitzvahs as much as saying, your mitzvahs make a difference. You make a difference. You have a purpose. When you do something really good, that brings infinite good into the world. And when you do something really bad, it brings the opposite to the world. That is what the giving of the Torah was. And that's what, if you want to look at it, that's why the Jews were so eager to do it. It wasn't about like, oh wow, now we have a list of things to do, we were so bored. They said, until now, our choices were ours. They served no purpose in the greater picture. They didn't really necessarily matter to God. Now, our choices, God's telling us our choices matter, our actions matter to Him. They're important to Him, they're essential to Him. Let's put it, sometimes you have people talk about marriage now. When you get married, what are you doing? You're committing yourself to someone else. You're saying, you are important to me, and more important than anything else. And I am important to you. And we are going to be important to each other. We are going to essentially service each other because we're so important to each other. We're essential to each other. In Judaism, we believe they're one soul. Let's look at it another way. Imagine like you have a husband and wife, and the husband cheats on the wife and comes And he says, whatever, he gets caught, it's on a video, on TV, whatever it is. She says, oh, don't worry, it's nothing, I love you. Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter? Right? It doesn't matter? You mean the husband doesn't mean anything to you? That's terrible, right? Sometimes people ask, when you look in the Torah, you see God says, I have anger and I'm a jealous God. And sometimes people say, oh, I thought God was loving, accepting. So at first we think like, okay, we want God to just be loving and accepting. But what God says, I'm a jealous God. Don't turn your back on me. What is he saying? He's saying you are important. If he would say like, oh, no big deal, go sin as much as you want. Essentially, God would be saying, keep kosher, don't keep kosher, keep Shabbos, don't keep Shabbos. That's no big deal, do what you want. The secret to the Torah is God said, you have a purpose which is essential to me. So this is actually nowadays we have more choices than ever, but we actually have higher suicide than ever, especially in males, by the way. And some people think that's sexist, that females have less suicide rate. But facts on the field, right? So there's some theories out there, but one potential is when you have so many choices and you don't feel you have a purpose and you don't know that you have a purpose, that you were put in the world for a purpose. You were put in the world because God finds you to be essential for him. Then you have so many choices, you feel that you don't matter. When life is about your comfort and your choices, ultimately you'll be like, well, I don't really matter to the big picture. However, when you know that, no, I was put here for a purpose, and God gave me the Torah. Wow, when I wake up in the morning, what Torah can I keep to express how important God is to me and how I know how important I am to God? Today we read the Moda'ani earlier today. And the Moda'ani actually, we say, thank you, God, for giving us another day, giving us our soul. Then there are these two words, which actually are troubling grammatically a little bit. It says, Rabba emunasecha. Great is your faith. Great is your faith. So there are different ways of translating great is your faith in God, faith in humanity. But the Rebbe once spoke about it, and he said, God, we say, great is your faith in me. You trust me. I matter. So when we look in Judaism, we say, oh, it's so restrictive, so many rules, mix out of my life, give me autonomy, give me freedom. Essentially what we're saying is we don't want to be important, and we're not recognizing how important, how essential every act we do is to God. So this is, yeah.
But isn't it the same as making laws that create civilization and getting rid of chaos, and you're doing it gives everybody a structure to follow that is, it keeps everything civilized.
It's similar, but it's different. Because when you look at laws, as we spoke last week, you have Saul laws, which are laws which go and they help humanity. But that's not the ultimate goal in the world. The goal in the world is not to make a good civilization. That's not why the world was created. For Jewish people, the goal is to get close to God and to bring God into your life. So if you look, we hope the whole world, we pray for all the governments to make good civilization, and now the Jewish people can start doing mitzvahs and charge up the world with the Torah and godliness. And that's our job here. So when we look at the Torah, the Jewish people didn't look at the Torah as restrictive. They looked at it like Abraham does all the mitzvahs, but they're not so essential to God. They're voluntary, right? He's doing it out of his option, goodness of his heart. It's his choice. Me, I have to do the mitzvah. That means God is telling me that you are so important to me. Your mission is important. You have a mission. You have a purpose. And that's really the lesson of Ruth. And let's go on with the next text. This is a similar text you guys probably know by heart. But that's why Shavuos, we get so excited. Shavuos is the marriage between the Jewish people and God. And that's actually all over the Shavuos readings and everything like that. Shavuos is the time where we say, we're recharging, we're saying, God, the fact that you're commanding us in the Torah means that we have a mission in the world. We're not just here by accident. We're not here by chance. I remember when I was a kid, in school, they're talking about evolution. So someone says, I don't understand. Everyone's worried about climate change, this, that. It's like, maybe we're just evolving, and maybe, just like there were ice ages and we disappeared and everything like that, now we're getting up to another stage where that's going to happen again. It's like, why are we trying to control what people do in the world and save the world and everything like that? Maybe we're just part of the process of disappearing off the world. If there's no God, then you're right. I have a friend who was a neuroscientist, and he told me he was very religious as a kid, and then he became a total atheist, and then he became very religious after he graduated, became a doctor. So he said, why did I become religious? I saw him a couple years ago, and I said, oh, wow, you're back at the synagogue and everything. I mean, he was vehemently atheist. He told me, he said, it's very simple. He said, the more I learned about how the brain is just a bunch of cells which develop together by chance, the more I realized that we give so much trust to it. It's just developed by chance. It evolved into this system where we think we can perceive things. There's no validity to that. It just happened to, if it would evolve differently, we would think things differently. He said, I realized that in Judaism we believe, no, God created a brain. And he said, use the brain to serve me. There's a purpose in your brain. Think Torah, study Torah. You're not there by chance. Your choices aren't just what you happen to choose by chance. Your choice, your job in the world is to do Torah and mitzvahs. And that is how you will connect to God. And that means how you'll be committed to God and fulfill your purpose. Okay, so let's go on with the next text, text 88.
Text 88.
Page
Text
11.
Page 88. Page 11. Text 11, page 88, sorry.
Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy with his commandments and commanded us to whatever.
So here you have the blessing. God is saying, what is a mitzvah? Asher kitshanu b'mitzvaysav. God is saying, I am sanctifying you. I'm making you holy with the commandment I'm giving you. I'm showing that you're important to me. I'm showing that you're real. You have a purpose. You're not just a flip-flop animal that happened to evolve and gets to make your own choices. You have the opportunity to connect to your mission, to be hired, to be connected to me, to be committed to me, to be committed to the God of the universe. All right, so here we have Boaz and Ruth. The other, we said Arpa, Elimelech, and Ploni, they were all looking, how can we get through life? What is the best choice for me to make? What was Boaz and Ruth? What was on their mind? Their mind was, how can we do what God wants? How can we do what God wants in this situation? Not how can I make the most out of this? How can I survive the best? How can I live the best life, the most lavish life, the most comfortable life? Or how can I protect my family the most? What does God want me to do? What does God want me to do? That is why I'm here. I'm here to fulfill God's mandate to me. So that is why we read the story of Ruth before Shavuos. To remind us that that's what the Torah is. The giving of the Torah, Abraham had the Torah. The giving of the Torah is when God said, I'm going to release the veil, and you're going to see that your job in this world is to be connected to me and committed to me, and every act that you do is very important to me. Okay, so now we'll just finish up, and we'll talk about the focus of life in the government is actually really good. In government, and that's actually sometimes... In the history of America, I'll talk about it in a moment, actually, this is off the record, but the focus of life is not what choices I have, but rather what responsibilities I have. Not what I need to get out of life, but it's really, what did God put me here for? That is actually something which the Rebbe spoke about when they took prayer out of schools. So he said, what's the problem in America? Everything's freedom, everything's great. It's freedom, we don't hurt each other, we are civilized, but that's all in the deficit. That's all fixing. That's all just making us behave properly. But what are we living for? That's not taught in America anymore. That's not taught in schools anymore. So when they took prayer out of schools, the Rebbe lamented. He said, oh, I know what's going to happen. Crime's going to go way up. Because people are going to say, well, I can get away with this, get away with that, and then the next thing they know, no one's watching. But when people know that no, laws keep us at the deficit level. But what is our life about? So that's why when the Rebbe released the idea of the moment of silence, which actually was voted into law in Arizona on the Rebbe's birthday 2 years ago, and in many, many different states, there's been a very big effort to a moment of silence. The Rebbe's moment of silence was basically every day in school, before they start school, they should give 60 seconds of silence, that the teacher is not allowed to say what to think. the kids can think whatever they want. And the Rebbe had confidence that the kids would ask their parents and say, well, what should I think? And their parents would say, I don't know, ask your grandparents. And they would say, think about God, think about our religion, think about our purpose in the world. And that's the goal. And really, the Rebbe believed that if you strip a person down, their purpose will come out. Okay, so now that we finished that, I just want to read the last text, which is a very, very interesting text, and I want to give the context. The context says, so how many people were created on the first day of creation?
One, none.
First day, well, how many people were created on Rosh Hashanah, the sixth day of creation? How many people were created on the sixth day of creation?
One, right?
None.
Two, right? Adam and Eve. Sixth day of creation. Sixth day of creation. Adam and Eve, right? So, now the way it worked out is God created Adam, and there was a problem, the Torah says. He was alone, right? So God took a rib out of Adam and created Eve. Actually, in Jewish mysticism, it actually says that's why women are much more refined than men. Because men are created from dirt, earth. And women are created from human. They're created from human, right? So women are much more refined because they don't have that dirt complex. And that's probably where the poem comes from. Frogs and snails, right? Puppy dog tails, right? So it's true. Okay. Anyways, the Talmud says, well, okay, why didn't God just create Adam and Eve at the first moment? Why did he first create Adam, let him be alone, and then create Eve? So the Talmud gives a bunch of different lessons about this. We're going to read one of them. This is our final text.
Every person is obligated to say the world was created just for you.
So the reason is, one of the reasons he gives is to tell us that every person has to say, the whole world was created for me. Sounds selfish, right?
I believe that.
Well, there's a deeper meaning. The deeper meaning is you have a purpose in the world. And the whole world is waiting for you to fulfill your purpose. Everyone has to say, I am here, I'm important, I'm extremely important to God. Like the only human here, actually. I have to focus on what I need to do because it's so, so important to God. And that's why God created Adam alone, to teach us that lesson, to teach us that we all have a purpose from God. We all have the Torah from God, which guides us. And it's and even though sometimes it seems like, oh, well, that's really hard on us. In truth it's because we're so important and so essential to God, and God needs us to do it so badly that the whole world revolves around, each person's supposed to view, the whole world is revolving around what I need to do, my purpose in the world. And when we do that, and we realize that our purpose is from God, then we know that when we have a mitzvah, it's a privilege. It's no longer an obligation that we need to get through and throw out. It's a privilege. God said, here's a conduit for me to show you your importance. When I tell you a man to put on tefillin or a woman to light Shabbos candles, God is saying, I'm telling you that you are important to me. This is how God communicates to us our importance. And hopefully we'll do that. We'll be more like Ruth and Boaz, and not like Elimelech and Orpah. And when we all do our purpose, we'll bring Mashiach. So that's an exercise. Think of all prayer project you have done, but you have never done, but you'd like to take on. How does our discussion of responsibility and obligation versus personal freedom influence your thinking of this project? Okay, you can think about that. We're going to go to the summary.
Lesson 3. Summary of the biblical narrative. 1. Elimelech, with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, left Bethlehem and went to the land of Moab, fleeing a severe famine that had stricken Israel. Elimelech died soon thereafter,